Good morning, everyone. It is just still morning. Welcome to this session on peatland finance. I introduced myself during the last Q&A. I'm Gordon Watson. I'm Chief Executive of Loch, Lomond and the Trossachs National Park, and obviously delighted that you're having this event here in our national park, and enjoying the view not just of the scenery but also of the extensive natural assets outside the window. The last discussion was really interesting, and hopefully this session gives an example of how we're trying to develop the pipeline of projects that people are talking about in the area of peatland. I'm going to be talking a little bit about how national parks are trying to scale up, both here and across the UK national park family. Rennie Kirkfleet-Hermans from the IUCN is going to be talking a bit about the Peatland Code. And George Hepburne, Scott of Forest Carbon, is going to be sharing some really interesting case studies with us in the third session. And then hopefully, if we don't talk too long, there'll be time for a Q&A at the end. So, let's see if these, yep. So, firstly, as I said, I want to talk about the action being taken in Scotland on peatland and how we in Loch, Lomond and Trossachs are partnering with others to try to scale up peatland restoration, and also to develop private finance opportunities to help this. So first, let me share with you the situation in Scotland. And so here, 50 peatlands of 50 centimetres depth or more cover around 30% of Scotland's land surface, which amounts to 2.3 million hectares. It's estimated that Scotland's peatlands store about 1.7 billion tonnes of carbon, which is the equivalent of around 140 years of Scotland's total greenhouse gas emissions. So, and in addition to those carbon benefits, and as we said earlier, it's not all about carbon. There's a range of other co-benefits to the environment as well. The habitats and biodiversity, the role in water quality, the role in managing flood risk, and also the enjoyment of peatlands in terms of enjoying the outdoors. Historically, peatlands have been undervalued in land use decision making, and as a consequence have been significantly damaged by various land use activities. That's been the result of drainage for agriculture and forestry, extraction for horticulture, whisky, fuel burning, grazing management, and also even some renewable developments have unfortunately been sited on peatlands. And it's estimated that around 80%, which is 1.8 million hectares of Scotland's peatlands, are now degraded. And that's effectively a net emitter of greenhouse gases, as well as impacting on those other co-benefits that I mentioned. And that damage is ongoing. This is a combination of overgrazing by deer and livestock, moor burn for grouse moors, ongoing drainage, and the indirect effects of some forestry which has been planted on peatland. And currently the carbon emitted is thought to amount to about 20% of Scotland's emissions. Thankfully though, natural capital thinking has recalibrated the value we now attach to peatlands, such that the restoration of degraded peatlands is now seen as an essential nature-based solution to the twin crisis of the climate emergency and loss of biodiversity. Scotland has about 60% of the UK's peatlands and is thought to have around 13 to 15% of the global total. It's also got an important role in terms of the restoration and supporting skilled green jobs in communities across rural Scotland, and therefore supporting our just transition to net zero by 2045. The Scottish Government's therefore been significantly committing to increasing the rate of peatland restoration and improving the management of peatland as one of the transformative changes needed to meet Scotland's emissions targets as set out in the 2020 Scottish Climate Change Plan Update. In 2020, the Scottish Government set out plans to invest more than 250 million to support the restoration of 250,000 hectares by 2030. And just this financial year, the spend has increased by 10% to 22 million as part of that commitment. This new multi-year commitment has been a real game changer for helping delivery organisations such as myself to really start to scale up our delivery and start to develop bigger multi-year projects with landowners to scale up our efforts. It's also helping other key players such as specialist contractors to have more certainty to invest in expanding their own capacity to do the work. However, both public and private investment in Scotland's natural capital will be essential to deliver our emissions reductions targets. The public funding commitment of 250 million over 10 years, in addition to delivering on the ground, increasingly needs to be used to leverage and attract increased private investment into peatland restoration and management. So with that focus on 250,000 hectares by 2030, that implies an annual restoration of about 20,000 hectares per year. With public funding, we're currently achieving about 5,000 to 6,000 hectares, and therefore we're off track, and that's been confirmed in the annual climate change plan monitoring reports. It's estimated that the funding gap to achieve our targets is around 2 billion, and that's where private finance is so crucial to help secure our vital natural carbon stores. The other aspect is that we use hectares just now as the metric for our targets, but we will have to move away from area-based measures to emissions-based targets, and the methodologies for measuring this are obviously still being developed. So how does that translate into the regional context of a national park? Here in Loch, Lomond and the Trossachs, peatlands cover roughly 37% of the park, which is 69 hectares, and hold an estimated 20 million tonnes of carbon and other greenhouse gases, and effectively may well be our single greatest natural asset in terms of tackling climate change. Our own peatland action team estimate that at least 11,000 hectares and probably more are in poor condition, again due to artificial drainage and various forms of damage. So this means that, again, here in the park, rather than trapping and capturing carbon, we're emitting carbon from that resource and therefore contributing to global warming. To date, we've restored about 650 hectares of peatland over the last 5 years, but we're now working to scale up our efforts and working towards a target of 2,000 hectares by 2023. But with increasing data on the extent of eroded peatland, we will be revising those targets upwards to scale up the restoration accordingly. So in order to help with filling the funding gap and attracting private finance into peatland restoration, we've been collaborating with the other national parks in the UK to build up a portfolio of investable nature projects. UK's 15 national parks cover 10% of Great Britain mainland and contain extensive natural capital assets in their boundaries, including 24% of the UK's peatlands. In order to facilitate a collaborative approach to attracting commercial partnerships and private finance to our project work, we've established national park partnerships as an entity, which I currently chair, to manage our partnerships with the private sector. In 2020, we came together to identify £240 million of nature restoration work that needed private funding by 2030. Net Zero with Nature is the strategy that seeks to place national parks at the heart of the UK's response to climate change and the biodiversity crisis. Through this partnership, we can offer a pipeline of projects that can offer the scale that many investors are looking for and that we need to achieve climate targets. Using the umbrella of Net Zero with Nature, our work to bring funding into national parks has resulted in a groundbreaking new partnership with Palladium, aiming to create a sustainable and equitable funding model for UK nature restoration at scale. Palladium is a global impact firm that works around the globe with corporations, governments, investors and communities on nature restoration, and which is collaborating with us at a UK level, providing pro bono advice to help create a sustainable funding model for nature restoration at scale. This collaboration started in late 2020 and has already initiated 4 nature restoration projects in national parks, and has so far generated 1.5 million of pledged funding for this work. We've now launched this partnership with Palladium as Revere, and through this partnership we hope to create nature-based solutions to transform the way we fund and restore nature in the park, with the aim of leveraging that 240 million that I mentioned. So Revere designs and delivers scalable nature-based solutions projects that we hope not only restore degraded peatlands, but also grasslands, woodlands and wetlands, and develop the sale of monetizable ecosystem services. So that not only would include carbon credits, but hopefully biodiversity outcomes, natural flood risk management outcomes, and water quality outcomes. And through the partnership, we were aiming to be equitable, testing financial models, making sure they're not only investable, but fair, equitable and ethical. We have an ethics charter guiding us. We're obviously attempting to achieve scale across our 15 parks, and we're looking to deliver that blend between public funding with private finance. For companies supporting Net Zero with Nature, there are three levels of support, of which founding partner is the highest, founding supporter is the highest. That's a status given to those businesses that sign up as the first major supporters of Net Zero with Nature from their industry sector, by giving a significant level of support for nature restoration work or a pilot project, together with a commitment to purchase carbon credits in the future. Our first founding partners are Santander and Estée Lauder companies, and we were delighted to announce in the last few weeks that Santander has committed to invest to restore 200 hectares of peatland in the Cairngorms National Park. So far we've developed 7 pilots, with 4 of these now publicly announced with funders, and these are located in the 4 different national parks that you can see on this slide. We're very much learning as we go, and we'll be happy to share our experiences as part of the broader effort to secure private finance on vital nature-based projects that help to mitigate climate change and achieve our national targets. My colleagues Naomi Conway from National Park Partnerships and Emma Davis from Palladium are here today. So if you want to chat to any of us after this, we're more than happy to share some of what we're doing, and obviously happy to take questions at the end of all of the presentations here today. Thank you very much. So I'll now introduce Dr. Rennie Kirkvliet-Hermans from IUCN, who's going to talk about the Peatland Code.
Thank you. Sorry, not too quick. Great, thank you very much for that, Gordon. So yeah, I'm Rennie Kirkvliet-Hermans. I'm the Peatland Code coordinator for the IUCN UK Peatland programme. I'll be talking to you about the code, how it's working, and I very much would like to hear from you afterwards, or maybe over lunch or in a discussion about if there's anything we can do to leverage more private investment into peatland restoration. So just very briefly, intact peatlands obviously store massive amounts of carbon. Sometimes these are meters and meters deep, but lots of carbon in them. However, if we degrade our peatlands, we have a lot of emissions of greenhouse gases, mainly carbon. If you lower your water table and you get bare peat, you get a lot of emissions from that. In the UK, about 80% of all our peatlands are in a modified or degraded state. So we've got a massive issue. Our emissions from these degraded peatlands are actually higher than the sequestration of all our forests in the UK. So we've got, yeah, like I said, a massive issue to deal with. Luckily, we can actually do something about this. We can restore our peatlands. We can block our drains that we've put in previously by thinking it was a good idea to drain these peatlands and see if we can use them in a different way. We can revegetate them and do some other things as well to make them better. The good thing with peatlands is as soon as you raise your water table, you very, very quickly reduce your emissions. So the delivering mechanism for peatland restoration to getting private finance into it is the Peatland Code. So like Gordon just mentioned, in Scotland, there's an estimated funding gap of about £2 billion to restore all our peatlands. So that's not just the government's pledge, that's to restore all the peatlands. We need to urgently restore these because, like I said, they're massive emitters, and we need private investment into peatlands, into this to be able to actually do this at scale that we need it. So that's where the Peatlands Code comes in. So this is a voluntary certification standard to attract private funding for peatland restoration projects in exchange for climate benefits, and it gives assurances to buyers. So it's a project developed and managed by the IUCN UK Peatland Programme. It is UK-based, so it's a domestic standard. It's about emission reductions. It does not account for the carbon that's already stored in the peatlands, because that we've got then going to issues with additionality in that case. And we've got a number of eligibility criteria and a number of legal and financial tests in place. I won't go into detail of that today, though. This is just very quickly of how the Peatland Code actually works. So a project needs to register on our UK land-based market registry in IHS market. So that's together with the Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Code, we now have created this one place where all projects happen, where all our units are issued as well. Projects gets designed, obviously, and then an independent validator validates the projects, and if that's all good, then you get your PIUs issued, so your pending issued units. These are a promise that your emission reduction will happen. Hasn't happened yet, but you can, if you want to, sell these PIUs if you need to create revenue for your actual restoration. Then you do your restoration, and then at year 5, and then every 10 years, we have an independent verification happening. That's when the independent verifier goes on site and they check that everything is in order. And if that's the case, a chunk of your units then get verified into peatland carbon units. So either PIUs or PCUs, so the verified units can be sold either directly to end buyers or via a broker to end buyers. And buyers can only companies can only make official offset claims on the verified peatland carbon units. And then they retire them. This is just briefly to show you, so the code is actually built on the best science, so we've got emission factors behind all of this. It's on the science that's also used by the government in its greenhouse gas accounting, but we still need more scientific evidence, more scientific survey and monitoring to actually get to expand the code across all condition categories that we need. And that would also include looking at sphagnum sequestration benefits, for example. So this shows you that even partially restoring or partly improving your peatlands actually already gives you a permanent annual emission reduction. So where are we at? So the code was launched in 2015, at the end of 2015. We now have 45 projects registered, which is just over 6,500 hectares of peatland restoration. In the last 12 months, our amount of projects have more than doubled. So we are definitely scaling up. We are getting more and more interest of landowners to actually get involved. So currently we have 7 projects at the validated state, which is about 600 hectares of peatland and just over 150,000 tons of CO2 equivalent emission reductions over the whole length of those projects. And there are another 28 projects that are undergoing validation right now, so that shows you that it is moving and we are very much there and doing this. There have been a few sales as well of PIUs, and George will be talking about that in a little bit. So what we obviously very much need is we need buyer confidence that what they're buying, the carbon credits that they're buying, are real, measurable and backed as well. So we are government backed, so if you look at some of the latest government documents like the government's net zero strategy, the Peatland Codes get mentioned and also their backing for it. The other thing is that in the UK government's environmental reporting guidelines, which is where 12,000 of the large companies in the UK are mandated to report on their emissions, it says that you can use peatland carbon units. So that's obviously very much needed because otherwise investors cannot do anything with them. And the other thing that's really important for buyer confidence is that you need a transparent registry. That's the UK Land Carbon Registry on ISS markets, where all steps of the code actually happen, and also our units issued together with Woodland Carbon Code units. Then, obviously, even though we're fully up and running, there are definitely still quite a lot of challenges that we do definitely need to overcome. One of the big ones is, like we've heard earlier, the money is there, the investors are ready, but we only have 44 projects. That's not enough. We very much need to upscale the supply side. We need to create more awareness amongst landowners. We need to create that pipeline of projects that we've heard all about earlier. One of the options there is that we do allow blending of private and public funding, so that helps with some of the risks for the landowners, that helps to get more confidence for landowners into that market, because it's not all on the carbon. And we are currently exploring with the government a carbon guarantee, so which would then set a floor price for carbon units, something similar but not the same as the woodland carbon guarantee in England, for example, where you then know at least this is the bare minimum I would get for my carbon units when they're verified. We've also heard quite a lot of investors are not really interested until you can get the millions in. So by nature, peatland restoration projects are quite small scale, so you only get a small number of units. So to be able to do that, we need to aggregate our projects at least on landscape level, get peatlands with woodlands, with biodiversity net gain, with any other markers that will come into this. A big one that I don't have time to explain and go into detail at the moment, but happy to discuss afterwards, is obviously the current COP26 negotiations around Article 6 and of course the need for or around corresponding adjustment. But if that would come into play for domestic voluntary carbon markets, we might run into big trouble for our domestic market, basically. All of this is still not enough for the challenge, so we very much obviously need more Peatland Code projects, but we also need to think beyond carbon. It's been mentioned before already, getting other nature capital markets like biodiversity, like water quality, which all for peatlands, if you restore your peatlands, all of that actually is at the moment bundled in, but we need to see if we can market that better. And there might be other options as well there. Very much like to hear about that. So thanks very much. So these are my contact details. And I will now be introducing George Hepburne from Forest Carbon. George is the Business Development Director of Forest Carbon, and he is a qualified chartered surveyor and has been working with Forest Carbon since 2016. His role spans both the development of Peatland Code and Woodland Carbon Code projects across the UK, but also regularly engages with businesses seeking to invest in nature-based solutions. George, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Renée, thank you very much for that introduction. Forest Carbon, actually, Renée, could you click onto the next slide? Thank you. Actually, if you go back one just to the opening slide, thank you. That's it. Excellent. Thank you very much. By way of introduction, we were founded in 2006, and since then we have developed over 225 woodland creation projects across the UK, along with 3 peatland restoration projects. And I've marked up here 2 of those peatland projects that I will briefly touch on today. Projects in the UK are validated and verified under the UK Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Code. These were launched in 2011 and 2015, respectively. We are also currently helping validate a further 45 projects under both codes for project hosts who are wishing to hold and retain the credits from their projects to either sell in the future or to retain these for their own reporting purposes. Co-funding for projects has been raised by selling carbon credits to directly over 500 UK businesses, as well as to tens of thousands of SMEs via partners of ours. We've also worked on behalf of Microsoft in Ireland to develop a programme of native woodland projects in 2017 and 2018. We are working on further pilot projects in Ireland with the aim of trying to establish a woodland carbon standard there. Our primary objective is to drive private sector investment into natural climate solutions, both in the UK but also overseas. We're also working with others to innovate and develop new carbon markets, including for soil, carbon and blue carbon. Next slide, please. The first project I was keen to touch on is located in the Scottish Borders. The project site is owned by a charity, Borders Forest Trust, who have acquired over 3,100 hectares at Taller and Gameshope, Carriffran and Corehead over the course of 2000 to 2013, and these 3 areas are marked in blue on the map. And I would recommend a visit by any of the attendees today to go and have a look. It's an amazing place. The overriding objective has been to restore these extensive areas of hill ground and associated upland valleys to their natural state. This has been done through a combination of native woodland and montane scrub planting, natural regen, and more recently, peatland restoration. The Peatland Restoration project that has been delivered over the course of 2020 and 2021 falls across both Taller and Gameshope and Carafran, and is focused on 4 main areas that I've marked in green markers. Next slide, please. Borders Forest Trust, working with Tweed Forum, identified 4 principal areas of blanket bog requiring restoration. This totaled an area of 104 hectares. These 2 images give some indication of the pre-restoration condition of one of these sites. An overhanging hag, you can see in these 2 slides, if left unrestored, will eventually collapse, with large chunks of peat then being washed away. The aim is to reprofile these hag edges to under a 35-degree angle and to stretch the vegetation over the reprofiled surface. Adopting the Peatland Code metrics, it has been estimated the project will deliver just under 18,500 tonnes of CO2 equivalent emission reductions over 100 years. The project secured its pre-restoration validation by OF&G, the appointed certification body, and this was under the Peatland Code in 2020. A combination of carbon funding and Peatland Action grant funding contributed to upfront capital costs. Carbon funding also contributed towards longer-term management and maintenance costs. This map here gives an indication of the overview of one of those projects. The blue lines, if you can make those out, represent the hags running across the wider site. Over the full 104 hectares restored, I think there were 11 kilometres of hags that were reprofiled. The pink areas on this map represent the drained areas surrounding those hags. Next slide, please. In this image, hopefully you can vaguely make out one of the diggers in action in the middle of the site here. This was up on the Gameshope Loch compartment of the project, and it is amazing to see firsthand the work being delivered by these highly skilled operators, often in pretty inhospitable locations and in challenging weather conditions. This photograph was taken on one of the better days. Next slide, please. Another shot of the digger in action. The operators here had a pretty lengthy and challenging drive to get their diggers onto the site, and they had to come over the back of that hill that you can see in the back of the image here. Next slide. The delivery of this project required collaboration across a wide number of organisations, both public and private. Effective collaboration is going to be vital to speed up and scale up restoration delivery, both here in Scotland, but across the UK. On to the next slide, please. I was keen to provide a brief example of one of the buyers of the credits that were generated following validation under the code. We are witnessing a growing number of UK businesses and organisations looking to acquire those pending issuance units that Renée talked about earlier, to then hold these to report formally as verified peatland carbon units or woodland carbon units in the future against residual emissions. However, we do still have a major pool of buyers looking to make softer CSR-driven references in relation to their co-investment in a particular project or group of projects. They are not seeking to, nor could they today, make statements in relation to carbon neutrality or having offset emissions. St Pancras International Station is one such organisation through which many COP delegates will have travelled via to get to the events over the last week. They have developed an initiative with retailers within the station to make a contribution towards the funding of the restoration. They were also keen to raise the profile of restoration through both social media channels and also exhibits within the station. Next slide, please. The second project I wanted to touch on is located just within Snowdonia National Park at Bulkai Groice. The site itself is owned by a family who actively farm in the local area. The project site has not been artificially drained. However, historical grazing and natural drainage has resulted in the formation of several large eroding hag and gully complexes with large patches of bare peat. The owners worked with Snowdonia National Park to deliver this project in 2020, and funding from Welsh Government Sustainable Management Scheme covered the upfront capital costs. Carbon funding is helping to fund longer-term management and maintenance costs. And the owners again were keen that this would act as a project to help educate and promote to other land managers in Wales the benefits of peatland restoration. Next slide, please. This shot gives you good insight into the restoration techniques being utilised, and it'll be fascinating to monitor the progress of this site over the next 35 years and beyond, including the wider co-benefits that we hope it will deliver. Next slide, please. Actually, if we can move on a couple of slides. Yep, move on to the next one. That's great. If we can just wait on that one, thank you. The buyer of the credits from this particular project was Dea Brewing Company. They approached us seeking to make an investment into a UK-based peat restoration project. This followed extensive work that they'd carried out with Tyndall Sustainability to calculate their scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. They then put in place a strategy to decarbonise their business and wider supply chain. But they realised there were going to be areas of their business that were going to be harder to decarbonise in the short to medium term, and that led to their desire to invest in a nature-based project, and they made that investment into this particular project in Snowdonia. Next slide, please. Again, this project came through the collaboration with a wide range of parties and different funding sources. And again, this is going to be critical to the scaling up of projects in the future. Next slide. I wanted to finish up by focusing on how we can effectively scale up and speed up delivery of restoration in Scotland, but also across the UK. We have worked hard with some entrepreneurial land managers to try and prove the concept. It has certainly not been perfect, nor has it been a highly streamlined or efficient process, but it has helped us gain a vital understanding of where improvements need to be made, where the bottlenecks and challenges exist. It also has helped us get both the Peatland Code and Woodland Carbon Code off the ground and gather some traction. This is a problem across many industries at the moment, but it is vital that we educate, train and recruit more people to perform the many vital functions that we need to get projects delivered. This includes, but is not limited to, peatland surveyors, contractors and certification staff. And we need to start that education in schools. We definitely see a need for greater utilisation of remote sensing to aid project development, but also ongoing monitoring of projects. And I'm aware of a number of public and private organisations looking very closely at this space at the moment. There is more clarity where it can be given, needed regarding the risks of project failure and how to ensure success. And we need to also start collating and sharing data across the UK in relation to ongoing costs of management and maintenance. Clarity is required on future agricultural support, as many are sitting and waiting to see what emerges before they commit to getting underway with projects. And added to this, we need more clarity on the net zero requirements that will inevitably fall on the farming and food production sectors. A greater array of private funding options are needed to address differing requirements of project hosts, whether they are tenants, crofters, graziers or landowners. And this will include the need for both short-term capital as well as long-term income streams. The development of a Scottish carbon fund and price floor mechanism may well be a core solution moving forwards. And finally, more clarity is needed on how carbon funding will align and interact with revenues from other ecosystem services in the short to medium term, i.e. for biodiversity, water quality enhancement, phosphate mitigation, to name a few. We very much recognise the importance of looking beyond just carbon. Understandably, some project hosts may have concern about going too early by delivering a project today and missing out on other income streams that might emerge over the coming years. So it's critical that we try and address some of these concerns. I will finish up there. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you to George and Gordon for these great talks. Unfortunately, we only have time for 1 or 2 questions because we ran slightly over time there. Sorry about that. If somebody has...
on peatland, providing that multi-layered habitat you'll see in Finland, in Sweden, in completely untampered with peat bogs of often these fantastic 3-dimensional habitats. Now, I've seen a lot of questions about obviously not afforesting peatland, and you can see that's a complete disaster, covering it in spruce. I've seen that in the flow country. What we're talking about is allowing woodland to form as it sees fit on restored peatland habitats. Now, having looked at the Peatland Code, I can't quite see whether that is something that is either going to be rewarded, punished, or simply not something that quite fits the current model. And I just wondered if I could seek some clarity on that, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a really good question. I think scientifically, the consensus is that most of our peatlands in Scotland were treeless. I fully agree that there are some that were tree, like that would have some forest on it. But currently in the Peatlands Code, because it's really difficult to then distinguish and see which ones would be coming from a tree plantation or which ones would have been there because it is fully functioning. We don't acknowledge that, we don't have that in the code at the moment. We don't have any emission factors for that either, because that's obviously the really important thing that underlines the code, is that we have emission factors, science-based emission factors for what you're doing to the peatland for the restoration, to be able to quantify that. Yeah, so at the moment it is not included in the code. That's small.
Sorry. Yes, it's a good question, which my colleague said, and it effectively means you have to take out any trees that do appear naturally in the bog. I mean, presumably the bog restoration would in itself, I mean, the one thing about letting nature take care of it is to allow that to happen. To then go back and say, actually, no, prescription says you can't allow that to happen, is going against everything we want to do with biodiversity here. And so it's really critical that we don't have that kind of restrictions, the sort of stuff that will stop us being allowed to have nature back in a way that allows nature to take its course. Yeah. Because if it wasn't meant to be there, it may well be taken up.
Yeah, no, I fully see your point.
I'm talking about native rather than non-native.
Yes, no, indeed. Yeah, I fully see your point. I'll take it on board fully. The difficulty is when you do re-wet your bog, if you get trees on there, they are going to drain that again. So you kind of need a fully functioning peatland before you allow trees to go back in, if that makes sense. So getting the trees in when they're still restoring makes that restoration to that fully natural functioning ecosystem that you're talking about quite difficult. I don't know if you have any other views on that.
Well, I was just going to say, it touches into this whole question about how the resource is managed once it's been restored, and there's a whole load of questions about deer management and all the other things that could be a threat to the resource that you've restored and you want to keep that way. So, and you know, that's just one of them, and I think that's another question that we, you know, all the debate about future support mechanisms, whether it's private finance or public, that's what we need to be focused on.
Do we have time for a very quick question online? Is that a short one? Yes.
We have a few questions online. If you like, I can read them out.
Thanks, Mark. That'd be great.
So asking, what's the progress on including forest to bog conversion in the code? What do you do on tenanted land? Who has control of the carbon? And what about the fact that the Science-Based Targets Initiative only allows carbon removals, not emissions avoidance?
Okay, I'll be very, very quick to answer all of them. Forest to bog restoration, we don't, at the moment our scientists are looking at our emission factors, updating them to the latest science and seeing where we include other condition categories under the code. for us to bog potentially, but probably we don't have the science there yet. So I think it is a couple of years down the line. Tenants, common credits are legally for the landowner, and it is up to the landowner and the tenant to agree how that is then distributed. Net zero and SBTI net zero guidance. Yes, it is. We are avoided emissions. SBTI says you need to take something out of the atmosphere to be able to claim your net zero. I would say if you do nothing to our peatlands, they keep on emitting. It needs an intervention. It needs private investment to restore the peatlands, which is, in my opinion, different than some of these avoided emission offsets, like solar panels, for example. And obviously, the government fully backs that. And they do allow to use like peatland carbon units as offsets in environmental reporting guidelines. Very brief answers, sorry.
Well done, thank you.
Great, well, thanks very much to all our speakers and the panel. Sorry, George, we didn't get to you. Did you want to add something very quickly to that?
I was just going to briefly add, in relation to the tenanted sector, I think it's going to be vital that very close attention is paid to this moving forwards. It is not clear cut, but I'm aware that the Scottish Land Commission are looking very closely at this particular area at the moment, and we welcome that. And it's going to be vital to scaling up the delivery of restoration, not only here in Scotland, but across the UK.
Thanks very much, everyone. One last general point. Nature Metrics is going to do some syringe water sampling outside at the Loch to take a sample that you then can analyse for DNA to get your biodiversity, a measure for biodiversity. So if anybody wants to see how that happens, please go.
I hope it's good.
And someone wants to add something to that, yes.
Don't tell me if it's not.